Strasshof, a prosperous suburb of Vienna. Natascha Kampusch was imprisoned here for 8.5 years. This is her story.
What I've learned about people is this: no one is infallible, and anyone can find themselves in a position where they lose control of their lives. That's true for the kidnapper, and it's true for me. From the moment I was kidnapped, I still had control of my thoughts, but I couldn't do anything about the world outside. And the perpetrator had blown a couple of fuses in his head, and he couldn't control his life either, or he wouldn't have done what he did. I'm an outcast. I have a sign on my forehead that says, crime victim. I think everyone has preconceptions about me. Maybe when I'm older, people will forget what happened to me.
Österreich 1.
Since yesterday evening, a 10-year-old girl has been missing in Vienna's Donaustadt district. Natascha wears glasses, she's 1.45 meters tall, has light brown hair with a fringe and blue eyes. She's been missing for more than 34 hours. All efforts to locate her have been unsuccessful, and the police are widening their search.
My mother always said, never part after an argument, because something could happen to one of us, and we'd never see each other again. And then it happened.
In die Schule ging sie sehr selten alleine.
She rarely went to school alone, but on that particular day she did. I watched her from the window as she left and walked towards the shopping center. Then she disappeared, and that was it.
Da ist sie halt verschwunden und das war's.
I was almost halfway to school when I saw a man in the distance standing in front of a white van, as though he were waiting for someone. I wanted to cross the street, but then I decided to keep going straight. When I came nearer, he came towards me, grabbed me and dragged me into his truck. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice box froze, no sound. The kidnapper said, if I didn't scream and didn't stand up and did what he said, he wouldn't hurt me. I didn't know what was going to happen. In that moment, I thought it was the end. I kind of knew the neighborhood from that angle, because when I used to drive home with my mother, I'd see the treetops and telephone poles. So I knew roughly where we were headed. Then he drove the white truck up to his garage, wrapped me in a blue blanket and carried me into the house. He carried me downstairs and put me down for a moment. I didn't know it then, but he'd opened everything up. Then he dragged me and carried me in.
Getragen und gezogen und
Then he left me in the cell, on the floor, in the
auf den
dark.
Boden gelegt im Finstern.
Ich habe halt gewartet und wie die
Natascha was always on time, so when she was 10 minutes late, I thought to myself, where is she? I'm going to call the childminder. But no one answered. I called half an hour later, and they told me she'd never arrived. At that moment, I nearly fainted. I knew something had happened.
Da ist irgendwas passiert.
It was as if the earth had just opened up and swallowed her.
I just sat there and counted to myself up to 21 seconds, and then to 60, and on, so I knew roughly how long I had been there. But at some point I lost track.
Wusste ich dann nicht mehr. Am ersten Tag.
That first day he brought me a mattress. It was just 5 centimeters thick and made of foam rubber. I only had the same blue blanket to cover me, and I had to use my jacket as a pillow. I wanted to keep my dress on, day and night. I didn't want to give up anything or reveal anything about myself. He'd taken away my school bag, and he burned my shoes in the first few days. He said I wouldn't need them.
A massive search is launched by police, starting at the housing estate where Natascha lives. Concerned citizens are calling in with information. Soon, the police have evidence of an abduction. Austrian police are investigating the disappearance of 10-year-old Natascha Kampusch, who was last seen walking to school on March the 2nd. She had about a 2-kilometer walk to school, starting from her home on the Rennbahn estate. Halfway along, there's a roundabout on the Melangasse. At approximately 7:20 a.m. that Monday morning, a girl standing at the roundabout says she saw another girl in a red anorak being forced into a white truck parked on the right side of the road.
At first, I had no way to contact my kidnapper if I needed something. He just came every day. Sometimes when he didn't close all the doors behind him, he could hear me knocking.
Dann konnte er mich zum Beispiel klopfen hören.
And then he installed an intercom system so I could communicate with him. I couldn't tell if it was day or night because my inner clock had gone haywire.
Völlig aus dem Gleichgewicht.
Years later, the entrance to Natascha's cell is discovered in the garage beneath a disguised trapdoor. Down below, a heavy cupboard and tires must be shoved aside. They reveal a safe, 70 centimeters high, screwed flush with the wall. Behind that, the half-meter thick wall has been hollowed out. To get in, you had to crawl backwards through the hole and then close a 150-kilo steel and concrete door behind you. Finally, you turned left to open the double wooden doors and stepped down into a 5-square-meter cell.
It probably took him an hour or so to open the cell. If he was working fast or he hadn't locked everything, it was a bit less. The effort was enormous, pushing everything aside and opening everything up. If anything had happened to him, or he had been taken ill, he'd never have got it open. I would have been sealed up like an Egyptian pharaoh, buried alive, dead and mummified.
The statement by the young witness triggers an enormous investigation. Police question 1,520 owners of white trucks and 650 other people, including a man from Straßhof, half an hour from the center of Vienna. A township with one main street, no real center, and 8,000 inhabitants. The man's name is Wolfgang Priklopil, an unmarried 35-year-old communications technician with no criminal record. Priklopil lives in his mother's house, where 2 investigators question him. His truck is full of rubble from a building site. He claims to have been at home on the day of the crime, but has no one to confirm his story. Police have no probable cause to search his house. They take Polaroids of his truck, write a report, and file it.
I met Herr Priklopil at Siemens. We did our vocational training there in the early 1980s, and we both worked there. Later, I set up a company renovating apartments, and I hired Herr Priklopil because I knew he was a reliable person.
Later on, he installed a timer. The lights went on at a particular time, and then it went dark, like in a prison, where the lights go off at 8 p.m. Every drop of water meant more mold. It was humid and wet in the little room, and there were all kinds of insects there. It smelled musty. It was very cold and damp, really disgusting.
Kalt, feucht, ekelhaft. Diese Einbauventilatoren.
And the ventilator was a kind of torture.
Folter.
It was very loud. And when it rotated for a long time and became hot, the blades began to melt. And then it didn't just make that droning noise, but another annoying sound.
Tock, 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 tock. Und dann wieder das normale Ventilatorengeräusch und tock, 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 tock.
That went on until the fan was broken. I began to get a sense for when he was coming. I would become very nervous. And then I'd hear the sounds of him unscrewing the safe and opening the concrete door.
Die Erschütterungen und so und vorher auch schon
lots of pounding noises. I'd sense it in advance somehow.
Weise wahrgenommen und da hatte ich dann immer so
And I'd get palpitations. My whole body would go into knots. My stomach would twist into knots. I'd break out in a cold sweat and I'd feel really queasy.
verspürt.
Ich erinnere mich, dass mich Herr Priklopil
I remember that Herr Priklopil asked me once, before the kidnapping, when we were renovating a flat, how one could effectively install sound insulation to reduce the noise of a hammer drill.
Ich erklärte ihm, dass der Beton
I told him that cement is a good insulation against voices,
aber dass man dann
but rock wool would be the best thing to suppress the sound of a hammer drill.
dieses Schlagbohrmaschinengeräusch unterbinden kann. Mit den Sätzen stellte ich dann
I
fest,
was horrified to discover from the police investigations that he used exactly this information to build the cell.
des Verlieses verwendet hat.
Special investigators in Vienna receive a second tip-off about Wolfgang Priklopil 8 days after his initial questioning. The informant is a police dog handler who lives in Straßhof. He reports on a neighbor, a reclusive man who owns a white truck. He's a shy loner and protects his house with electronic surveillance systems. He may store weapons there, and he's thought to have a sexual interest in children. The officer has never learned his name, but provides a description. The special task force immediately orders local police in Straßhof to check the man's address. Then a fax arrives. Wolfgang Priklopil isn't registered as living at the house. His mother is. Priklopil is only staying there. His truck was checked on the 6th of April. The tip-off is filed and forgotten. Natascha Kampusch has disappeared into thin air.
Sometimes, when I was giving her pictures of dust in the living room, I would hold them to my chest or kiss them, and I said, "Don't give up. You're a strong, strong child."
Ein starkes Kind.
So ganz am Anfang.
At first, I didn't have to help him with his work because he was afraid that if I came upstairs, I might attack him with the tools.
Wegzulaufen. Und je mehr er sich sicher war,
But when he was sure I was too scared of him to run away,
hat er mich
he let me up.
aufgelassen und dann hat er auch immer
But he made sure everything was locked, so I couldn't get out.
gestellt, dass ich nicht weg konnte. Es war wirklich so, dass ich
I didn't see any daylight for a long, long time.
gesehen habe.
Then, when I finally came upstairs, I still didn't see any, even though it was daytime, because he closed the blinds.
Der hat mich dann eben
He began integrating me more and more into his household, until I became a kind of slave. He always made sure I couldn't run away. He threatened me and kept everything locked.
Das muss eine wahnsinnige
It must have been incredibly gratifying for him to keep someone captive, someone who was there for him alone, someone not even his mother or grandmother knew about.
Seit dem Zeitpunkt, nachdem
From the time that Natascha Kampusch was kidnapped, I visited his house about twice a year, but never noticed anything unusual.
Ungewöhnliches bemerkt.
Herr Priklopil was very concerned with hygiene and cleanliness, and he was extremely frugal.
Der einen Seite
On the one
kann er sich
hand,
einen BMW
he
leisten
could afford a BMW,
und leistet sich den, und auf der
but on
anderen
the other, he let me go hungry.
mich hungern. Das ist schon
That's
grausam.
cruel.
Weil das Geld
For the money he spent on a tank full of
hätte ich
petrol,
wahrscheinlich 1-2
I could have
leben
survived for 1 or 2
können.
weeks,
Oder noch länger.
or even longer,
Wie viel ich gegessen.
depending on how much he gave me to eat. Isn't that macabre?
Irgendwie makaber.
Das eine, das war, da bin ich, wie wenn ich zum
Sometimes, when I went with the police to identify things, I felt I was going to my own execution. I'd have to go somewhere near the school or near my flat because they'd found a bag and wanted to know if it belonged to Natascha. Sometimes it was a shoe in a bush or a pair of panties in a car or a red jacket in a garage.
Die Jacke von der Natascha ist.
I was always so relieved when I saw that none of these things were Natascha's.
Wenn ich etwas
If I had some skin cream, I rubbed some into the wooden boards of my bed, because it was a bit like furniture polish.
Politur. Ich habe einfach viel abgestaubt.
I did a lot of dusting, and at the weekends,
Wochenende habe ich meistens
because I'd got used to doing it with my mother
sie das am Wochenende gemacht hat.
when I had time.
Am Wochenende dann, wenn ich Zeit hatte und dort eingesperrt war,
When I was locked up,
einfach
I sorted
das alles
things out,
wieder
tidied
sortiert
everything
und
up,
abgestaubt
and I dusted.
aufgeräumt und ja. Er hatte einen totalen Putz.
He was obsessed with cleaning, and of course he was constantly wiping off things that I might have touched. I wasn't really supposed to touch anything because, of course, fingerprints leave ugly, greasy marks. He would punish me if he found a fingerprint anywhere, not only because it was potentially dangerous to find my fingerprints in his house, but because he hated the look of fingerprints on his household surfaces. He would grab me by the wrist and use the back of my hand to wipe the prints of the refrigerator or the door frame.
Dem Türrahmen. Ganz zu Beginn
Right at the beginning, he made me wear plastic bags on my head. I stitched them together and attached them with a rubber band.
Und das war dann einfach scheußlich.
It was horrible because the color came off onto my skin and it hurt because I had to fix it with clips and rubber bands.
Also so Haarbänder, also alles Mögliche drauf.
It would have been easier just to tuck the hair under the plastic. But he insisted on the clips and grips, and they dug into my scalp and hurt. It was tight. Really unpleasant.
Ein sehr unangenehmes Gefühl. Ich hatte dann schon so komische Stirn.
It made me frown all the time. It was horrible.
Und dann hat er gemeint, wenn
Then he said, if I shaved my head, it wouldn't be so bad. And it was torture. So when he trusted me enough, I got a pair of scissors, blunt of course, so I couldn't harm myself. And I used them to cut my hair. And then he saw that. He said he might as well cut it all off. And he did.
Schneidet. Und ich habe ja ein paar Mal
There were
auch
times when the torture and the humiliation were so bad that I ran to the window and shouted for the police. Then he grabbed me really roughly and choked me and hit me.
geschlagen. Es war natürlich so, dass ich
So
mich
of course,
teilweise einfach
sometimes I would rather be in my cell
als
than have to leave it
und irgendetwas
to do something I didn't want
was ich
to,
tun wollte, irgendwie bei Arbeiten
like
helfen
help him work.
oder, was er auch
Something he
gemacht hat,
did when
er
he
krank
was
war,
sick,
dann bin ich raus,
not at
also nicht
first,
in der
but
ersten
later.
Zeit, dann erst später. Und musste ihm eine
I
Suppe
had to come up
aufwärmen
and
oder einen
I'd
Tee
have to
kochen
make him
und
soup
dann bin
or
ich
tea,
wieder
and then
gebracht
he'd
worden.
take me down again.
Das war irgendwie,
It was very
ja, das war sehr
frustrating
frustrierend, weil solange er krank war, hat er eben total
because when he was sick, he'd completely forget that I have my needs too, that I might want to eat too or need some daylight,
dass ich auch etwas
or I want to wash
mich
myself.
waschen möchte.
The pressure is building on the police to get results. They decide to tap the telephone of Natascha's mother. They hope the kidnapper will try to get in touch. A caller claims to be holding Natascha captive. But it's a hoax, one of many.
Der Nahrungsentzug war
Going hungry was dreadful. You almost feel like a drug addict and ask yourself, why am I hungry? Why do I even feel hunger? Why can't I manage without food?
auskommen. Er hat einfach alles, was er mir zum Essen
He would show me all the
gegeben hat,
food there was before he gave me anything to eat. But then he'd only cut off a tiny piece for me. He decided exactly how much I got to eat.
einfach ganz genau kontrolliert.
He never let me have what I wanted or as much as I wanted, because he said, I moved around so little in the cell. I didn't need it.
Weil ich ja auch keine Bewegung in dem Verlies mache und so. Er wollte nicht, dass
He
ich
didn't
weine,
want me
hat
to
mir
cry,
deshalb
and
immer
each
mit
time I
dem
did,
Handrücken
he rubbed my tears into my face with the back of his hand.
sozusagen. Oder mich am
Or he
Hals
took me by
gepackt
the
und
throat
gewürgt und
and
ins Bad
dragged me,
gezerrt und mich,
jerking
zum
me to the
Waschbecken
bathroom,
runtergedrückt.
where he held my face over the sink so I couldn't cry anymore.
Ja, also er hat mir das
He wouldn't
alles
let me
Weinen
cry
verboten,
because he was afraid
weil er
the
Angst hatte, dass
hydrochloric
seine
acid in my
Niesen
tears
irgendwie
would
von der
corrode
Seite
his
und die
towels.
Tränen eingegriffen würden. Er hat mich immer gezwungen,
He always
in die
forced
Augen
me
zu
to look
sehen
him
oder
straight in the
den
eye
Blick
or
auf
look
den Boden
down
zu
at the
senken,
ground
so
in a
sozusagen,
very submissive way.
untertänigst und unterwürfig,
Of course, I
was ich
couldn't
natürlich
do
nicht
that for
gemacht
long,
habe oder
because I
nicht
won't be
dauernd,
forced to do
weil ich
anything
mich einfach
against
nicht
my
zu
will.
etwas zwingen lasse, das ich nicht möchte. Damit hat er natürlich
And of
auch
course,
gearbeitet.
he
Er hat
got
mir die
back
ganze
at me
Zeit
because of
eingeredet,
that.
dass ich
He
nicht
kept
kann,
telling me I'm
dass ich
useless and
eben
worthless, and that I'll never have a
keine
chance
Chance
to
habe,
escape.
zu entkommen. Es hat ihm einfach Spaß
He just
gemacht,
liked having someone to dominate.
und es hat ihn
And the
gereizt,
more
je
I
mehr
resisted and
man
answered
und je
back,
mehr man
the more satisfying it was for him to put me down and dominate me, to boost his own self-esteem.
und sein eigenes Selbstwertgefühl dadurch aufzubauen.
He despised people. He hated his neighbors, although he was nice to them. He hated his surroundings and society, though he pretended to be a conformist.
Also obwohl er eigentlich angepasst tat.
Herr Priklopil war ein Einzelkind.
Herr Priklopil was an only child, and after the death of his father, he developed a very intense relationship with his mother.
Er stellte bezüglich Frauen,
He placed high demands on women.
diese sollte sehr gepflegt sein,
They had to be well groomed. slender and blonde.
Blonde Haare haben und also diese hohen
Of
Ansprüche
course, these were hard demands to fulfill.
waren natürlich schwer zu erfüllen.
A private detective with his own theories about the crime mounts a campaign against the police's handling of the investigation. As a result, 120 files have to be transferred to a new police commission. By the end, there will be 167 files. Natascha's body has supposedly been buried in an allotment. Nothing is found. A year later, the private detective insists on another dig. He suspects Natascha's mother.
Der Privatdetektiv hat eine Geschichte.
The private detective cooked up a theory that I was having an affair with a businessman, and Natascha was in the way. So we murdered her and buried her in a pond he owned.
Gehört, haben wir sie vergraben. Und da hat
And the detective kept on at the police about digging there until they agreed. And of course, they found nothing.
nichts ergeben.
Man ist dort im
You're locked up there in the dark. There's no electricity and you're hungry. And then, yes, you think to yourself, what's the point? Why not put an end to all this?
Aber dann kommt man zum
But then you come to the conclusion
deshalb, weil es einfach
that
so
you
eine
mustn't give up,
schreiende Ungerechtigkeit ist, dass man sich
because the whole thing is such a monstrous injustice.
man würde sich
You mustn't allow yourself to be defeated. It was a kind of fighting spirit that kept me alive.
mehr erhalten hat. Er hat viel Bücher.
He had lots of books, and he'd probably kept all the books he had to read in school. And then I got them. Later, he went out and bought me non-fiction books, because I liked them, and some dictionaries, and books on philosophy.
Ich wollte mir auf meine eigene Art.
I wanted to learn and discover things in my own way.
Und
So I asked him
ich habe mir
to set me tests from maths books.
also so Bücher, wo eben mathematische Aufgaben drinnen sind und da gut rechnen.
He was good at maths, so I asked him to mark the tests for me, and he did.
Und das hat er dann auch gemacht. Nur leider hat er
But
das
unfortunately, it's the way he did it.
einfach überall
He
einen
found
Fehler.
mistakes everywhere, and because he had this controlling side and he wanted to dominate me, he just crossed everything out in red ink.
Alles durchgestrichen und so. Also er wollte so den. Ich hatte überhaupt
All that time I felt he wanted to be like some old-fashioned teacher. I'm in charge here, and that's probably how he was treated in his childhood.
ihm so gemacht.
Was ich an ihm geschätzt habe,
I appreciated the fact that he was always polite and very reliable.
auf der anderen Seite
On the other hand, he was rather shy and a bit
ein
introverted.
bisschen verschlossen.
Er hat einfach versucht.
He always tried not to offend anyone, and I'm sure he was a very obliging person, neighbor, son, and grandson.
Sohn.
Später hat sich dann das
Sometime later, the Vienna City Council offered their help. They said something I shall never forget to this day. I should buy a grave, a plot, so I could have a place to go to talk to Natascha. I left the office, sat in my car, and burst into tears. I couldn't even drive home.
Mann, was soll das?
My child is alive. She isn't dead. Natascha was never dead for me. No one ever showed me any proof. There was no evidence to the contrary. So I always believed Natascha was alive, right through the 8.5 years.
Die ganzen 8,5 Jahre.
Mit den Jahren, ich durfte dann
After a few years, I could go out into the garden with him, sometimes at night, for 5 or 10 minutes. I was so happy I could touch the trees and the hedge, and I could feel the grass and the wind on my skin, because of course there's no wind in the house, and it was so good. I asked him if I could take a twig from the hedge back down to my cell, so I could always think about it as a kind of memento. Who takes something from the garden into the house to remember it by? For a while I kept a diary, a kind of workbook, where I wrote down everything I did in the house, clearing up this, cleaning that, siliconing. I had to wash every tile by hand before it could be laid. I had to check every tile for flaws because of course he wouldn't use any tile that wasn't perfect. I squeezed out sponges, shoveled rubble, carried heavy packets of tiles. It was exhausting. I was extremely weak and thin.
The first few years I baked a cake for Natascha on her birthday and chucked it away after a couple of weeks. But I always tried to keep Natascha alive in my mind, to include her wherever she was. I tried to let her know somehow, maybe by telepathy, that I was thinking of her.
On my birthday, I always remembered all the birthdays I had celebrated with lots of other kids and with a special cake.
Einer speziellen Torte
And how different it is now, all alone in the cell.
ganz alleine. Es ist natürlich so,
Well,
dass man
of course, at the beginning nothing. The kidnapping, of course, but all the humiliation and the other things didn't come till later. Then I really began to hate him for the way he was torturing me. But maybe the secret, the reason I survived all those years, was because I forgave him for everything, almost as soon as it happened.
Verziehen habe. Also, ja.
I think if I hadn't forgiven him,
dann
I would have been so full of hate
voll Hass und voll negativ
and negative feelings that it would have become unbearable and it would have destroyed me physically.
physisch zugrunde gegangen. So eine Tat,
The kind of crime he committed
so eine Art
is usually the result of some illness or injury, and the person can't usually do anything about an illness.
fehlgeleitet sein, kann der Mensch nichts. Aber dieser Täter,
But this criminal had a conscience. He still had a conscience.
und der war sich dessen
He was aware on some level of what he was doing. You could see that he was weak and unstable because of some kind of illness or injury.
wurde, dass er einfach
He had become so unstable
so
that he saw the
labil war,
kidnapping as the solution to his problems.
als Lösung für seine Probleme
It didn't
gesehen
matter
hat,
what
dass
the
da jemanden
problems really
kidnappt,
were,
egal welche
or
Probleme,
how he
egal
thought
wie
this
er sich
could
die
help,
Lösung vorgestellt hat,
but
aber
he
er hat
did
es als
see it as a solution.
Lösungsweg gesehen und
That actually made me feel pity and compassion for him, because many people are looking for the meaning of their lives, and many fail. Some commit suicide, others take a wrong turning. And he thought that if life hadn't given him what he wanted, he must take it by force. He felt that he must become like everything that had injured him and made him ill.
7 years have passed since Natascha Kampusch's kidnapping. 7 years in which she has grown into a young woman. No one would recognize her now. They're still looking for her, or rather for a name in police files. And that allows her kidnapper to take her out into the city, even to work for him, renovating an apartment.
Many people ask why I didn't simply run away while he was busy. But he always made sure I was carrying something heavy, or there was some other reason I couldn't just run. He was very good at keeping up the pressure. And we'd be out in his van, and I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone. He said he'd kill anyone I spoke to, or he'd kill me and anyone who'd seen me. It was hopeless.
Es war dann einfach aussichtslos. Und dann gab es eine Begebenheit.
Once we were on the way to the hardware store. We got caught in a traffic jam. And there was a police checkpoint up ahead of us.
Da war dann so eine Polizei.
There was a rather stocky policeman there,
Und das war dann so ein
a friendly type,
ziemlich stämmiger Polizist. So ein
but he didn't
gemütlicher,
look
der
too intelligent.
aber irgendwie nicht gewirkt hat, als hätte er so viel Intelligenz. Und den habe
And
ich versucht,
I tried to signal him with my eyes
also, dass der
that something was wrong,
der ist nicht drauf
but he
aufmerksam
didn't
geworden.
pick it
Er
up.
hat sich wahrscheinlich gedacht, ich habe eine
He probably thought I was mentally disturbed or epileptic or
aber
something.
der ist nicht drauf gekommen, dass
Anyway,
ich
he didn't notice or ask any questions. He just checked the car documents and waved us through.
Gewunken. Wenn irgendjemand
If someone jumps out of a car and starts pounding on the windows of other cars, they don't look especially normal or trustworthy. The way I looked at the time, so thin and pale, people might have thought I was crazy or a drug addict.
oder verrückt oder so gehalten.
Ich habe eine Veranstaltungshalle.
I own an events hall, and in July 2006, Herr Priklopil called me and told me he wanted to borrow my trailer.
Ausborgen.
Dann sind wir eben
And one evening we drove to this hall.
zu dieser Halle gefahren. Und
He had to pick up a trailer he owned,
Anhänger, der ihm eigentlich
or
ihm oder gemeinsam
he
mit
owned
dem
with Holzapfel.
Holzapfel gehört hat, abgeholt. Und dann habe ich
And then I saw Holzapfel. But I didn't know if he was his accomplice or if he would believe me, because he was obviously his best friend.
Mitbekommen.
Er kam dann später.
When he came, he was accompanied by a young girl.
Als ich
I saw the girl as I opened the door to the hall,
dann das Mädchen
and he introduced her to me as an acquaintance. I shook her hand and said hello.
sagte ein Grüß Gott.
Das war auch keine
That was hardly a situation where I could have said something. So I didn't try to escape. I just did what I was supposed to do, shook his hand and said nothing, the way he'd drummed it into me.
eingebläut hatte und
Ich musste mich aber dann
Then I had to leave because I was under time pressure.
wenig Zeit hatte.
I got everything that you want. Like a heart that oh so true. Just call on me and I'll send a lot with love from me to you.
I could have committed suicide. Thought it was much better to be dead than locked up for good. But that day, thank heavens, I found the courage and just ran away.
Österreich 1.
At 1:04 p.m. today, a confused young girl was discovered in a garden in the town of Strasshof. When police arrived, the young woman claimed to be Natascha Kampusch.
He was talking on his cell phone, and he'd told me to vacuum the van, which I was doing.
Das habe ich auch irgendwie gemacht. Der ging, weil es so laut.
The noise was so loud that he walked over to the swimming pool, maybe 11 meters away.
Und hatte das Garten
He'd left the garden gate open,
gelassen,
unlocked.
also nicht versperrt. Und ich habe
So I grabbed the opportunity. I left the vacuum cleaner on and ran away, really, really fast, as fast as my legs could carry me.
When they searched the house, police found a prison cell in the garage.
It has just been reported that the alleged kidnapper has committed suicide.
Then apparently he drove to the train station and he laid down on the tracks. Then the train ran over his head. Then he was dead.
Dann war tot.
Natascha Kampusch becomes a media star overnight, darling of the world's press. The missed tip-off from the police dog handler causes a political storm. There's talk of cover-ups, mistakes, half-truths. Austria's scandal-racked government resigns 2 years later. The papers spread rumors of sadomasochism, child pornography rings, and possible accomplices.
Of course, they want to make headlines. Child pornography and Natascha Kampusch are linked all the time. That's so painful.
So unangenehm.
No sadomasochists, no pornography ring came by. As far as I was concerned, I only had contact with the kidnapper. Did he do something like that? I don't think so, because he didn't have the time. But we'll never know. We could only ask him, and he would probably deny everything. But no one would believe him, because people like to hear stories about sadomasochism and child porn rings. That's the way it is. People love horrible things and they can't get enough of them. They seek them out and exaggerate them and embellish them, make them even more terrible and disgusting and revolting and vile.
Überziehen.
The press asked me straight out whether I was raped or sexually abused and that kind of thing. But in my eyes, the way the media treated me after my escape is a form of abuse too, and they should be punished for it.
Und sollte auch bestraft werden.
In many people, I trigger some kind of unconscious aggression. Maybe the whole crime and what happened to me triggers aggression, and I'm the only one they can still reach, and so it all lands on me. Right from the start, I said I'm not a victim, because I knew that if I present myself as a victim and show everyone how terrible it was, they'd never accept me as a normal person again. They'd say, you've debased yourself so far. What do you think you're doing here? Go back where you came from. Go back down to your filthy swamp. That's how most people are. That's how they think. I just want people to treat me normally. I deserve a chance like anyone else. I think people should be glad I halfway survived all this.